The first gunshot came from the dark behind the canvas tent, and the men crowded along the street barely flinched. By the time the second shot cracked, a lantern swung, a body folded into the dust, and the piano down the road kept right on playing. On the edge of the Arizona Territory, where the railroad paused before a deep gash in the earth, Canyon Diablo took shape like a storm cloud. It was little more than a wind-beaten row of shacks along a single street, but it carried a reputation big enough to fill the horizon. The railroad had pushed west in a hurry, chasing time and investors' patience, until its surveyors ran into the canyon, a ragged split of rock and shadow too wide to bridge in a week and too deep to cross with fill. Work stopped. The company hammered down a siding and called it Canyon Diablo. Crews gathered from everywhere: freedmen, vaqueros, miners between camps, cowhands with calloused palms, drifters with good backs and bad luck. Every train that rolled in brought steel, ties, flour, barrels of whiskey, and men who could swing a sledge. Every train that rolled out carried money, rumors, and sometimes a body under canvas. There was no law worth the word when the first tents went up. Paperwork lagged behind the people, and the county seat was a long ride away. By night, the one street exploded into light. Saloons with plank bars, gambling rooms thick with smoke, dance halls where music and boots pounded the floor, and narrow cribs tacked to the alleys. Locals nicknamed it Hell Street. Dealers rapped the table and called for bets. Fresh hands from the bridge site poured their week's pay into faro, monte, and roulette, while bottles changed hands faster than cards. A man could buy breakfast, a shave, a pistol, and a funeral without crossing the road. Stories hardened into legend. People said the first appointed marshal wore a badge less than half an hour before a quarrel with a gambler put him on the hill. Another tried and didn't last the night. A teamster who lost his stake at the green table tried to take it back with a gun and met a shotgun in the doorway. Fires leapt from lamp to awning and took whole fronts of buildings before a bucket line could catch them. Everyone remembered the scent of raw whiskey and kerosene, the sag of a body over a hitch rail, the way a piano would stop on a single hanging note. The canyon itself was not quiet. Builders rigged derricks and lowered men by rope to drill footings. Gusts rose out of the chasm and shoved at the scaffold until planks creaked beneath a boot heel. Workers tied hats to their heads and tools to their belts, and learned to keep eyes on the next bolt instead of the drop. Below, a dry river worked through shale and sandstone. Above, the town watched like gamblers sweating a final card. There were honest people, foremen who knocked trouble flat with a look, cooks who stretched beans and bacon to feed 100, a blacksmith who fixed more than he charged. Some families threw up canvas by the track and hoped to ride the railroad to a safer place down the line. But Canyon Diablo belonged to nights. As the sun slid off the rim, lamps woke, the pianola rattled, and the professionals went to work. Cards were marked, dice were shaved, bottles were sweetened with whatever a man wouldn't notice until his legs went soft. A fight might start over a crooked deal and end with a man face down in the alley, pockets turned out and boots gone. Boot Hill fattened fast. Wooden markers leaned in the wind, letters burned in with a hot nail. Sometimes a board held a full name and a date. Sometimes it showed nothing but initials, or a nickname no mother would have chosen. Men who slipped from the scaffold shared the ground with men who fell on Hell Street. Dust lifted from the graves and drifted back toward town, settling on glasses and cards like a second skin. The work ran in fits and starts. Timbers split. Once, a payroll vanished between the siding and a saloon, and half the town swore the thieves wore tin stars. A dealer won too heavily, and someone fixed the odds with the butt of a pistol. At last, the county planted a steady lawman, a spare rider who knew when to hold the line and when to let men cool off. He kept pistols in holsters until midnight and knives on tables by rule, and even he admitted the rules were more hope than law. Then the work leapt forward. Spans met, bolts drove home, and rails ran straight into the gap. One morning the whistle blew and a locomotive edged onto new iron with men perched along the tender, grinning like they had walked across the sky. The obstacle that had stalled the railroad through a season was suddenly a solved problem of angles, rivets, and nerve. That night the street threw a celebration. Drinks ran free, and even long grudges were set aside. Then the bosses posted notices. Crews would move west at dawn. Men rolled their blankets. Gamblers watched the faces they lived on harden into caution. You could hear the future leaving, the thump of boots, the clatter of pots dropping into crates, the clink of coins, counted and tucked away. Before midnight, men who had sworn they'd die in Canyon Diablo were bargaining for a spot on the next flat car. Canyon. Diablo did not die politely. Some stayed, the cheats who believed luck would circle back, saloon keepers with too much whiskey to haul, women with nowhere to go. A day later, the first through freight rattled across the bridge without stopping. Then another, and another. With no reason to pause, the railroad gave the town nothing but a string of smoke. The remaining sharpers fought over a shrinking pile of coins and pawned watches when no one wanted their IOUs. A knife fight ripped through the last dance hall and shattered its mirrors. By the time a spring dust storm blew in, 2 doors on Hell Street swung to empty rooms, and the third creaked on broken hinges. The end felt like a trick. A traveler stepped off a slow freight and found the street half silent. Same false fronts, same hand-painted signs, but doors yawning, a stray dog asleep under the roulette wheel. A playing card lay face down in the road. He turned it with his boot, the Queen of Hearts, scuffed and meaningless. He found a man who still kept a key to a bar and poured beer for the both of them. They sat among fly-specked mirrors while the keeper told a story that grew shorter each time. Years later, a highway would race nearby, and another dot on the map, 2 guns, would flare and fade with the era of road trips. The canyon remained. Stand on the rim in late light and you can hear why the railroad paused. Wind climbs the walls and rushes at your ears like breath. Trains cross the span in seconds now. What took months of sweat and risk has become a blur, the kind of thing you only notice when it's gone. They say a town is the sum of what people choose to remember about it. Canyon Diablo is remembered for 1 hard mile of temptation and a hill of graves, for a marshal who didn't live long enough to warm his chair, for card games that ran until dawn, for a bridge that meant everything and then suddenly meant nothing at all. Mostly it is remembered for how fast it vanished. One night, lamps burned over a crowd, certain morning would look the same, and the next morning those lamps swung over empty rooms. Stand there in your mind and watch the last men leaving, their shadows long across the dust. Hear a nail loosen, a door slam, a dog bark at a train that will not stop. See a woman waiting in a doorway until there is nothing left to wait for. By noon, the wind erases every footprint. The story shrinks to a rumor. Canyon Diablo, once the roughest notch on the line, is a ghost pressed into the rim of the desert, waiting for a traveler to ask what happened here and for the wind to answer. Thank you for listening to Deserted Trails. Subscribe for more forgotten stories from the old frontier.